Right, so myth number one is when you tell yourself that I should have been more productive, and you use that as a reason to flagellate and beat yourself up at the end of the day. Yes, maybe you could have been more productive, but telling yourself that you should have been and you're gonna beat yourself up, it doesn't change how much work you managed to get that day. It doesn't change how productive you are. It just makes you feel terrible about yourself. And so these days, whenever I'm tempted to tell myself, oh, I should have been more productive today, I just remind myself, you know what? I can just simply choose to be satisfied with how much work I've done today, and it's totally fine. I can always begin again tomorrow. All right, myth number two is that consistency is more important than intensity. There is a whole movement these days that says it's all about consistency. It's not about putting in loads of effort. Right now, it's about putting in small amounts of effort over a very long period of time, and then you'll get those results. And I definitely agree with that, but there are some important caveats here. And I think almost we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and we have kind of given intensity a bad name. There's nothing wrong with being intense about something. Like, not everything in life is a marathon where you have to pace yourself. Some things can be sprints. If you're, for example, trying to get a project out the door and you just want to finish the thing, then it's totally fine to have like a brief period of intensity. If you're, for example, thinking of starting a YouTube channel and you're like, have never done any of this stuff before, then it's totally okay to just decide, you know what, today I'm just gonna spend all day just trying to get this YouTube channel started and get my first video out. That's not sustainable forever. You can't spend like a whole 18 hours or 12 hours in a day focusing on your YouTube channel every single day. But it doesn't need to be sustainable forever. It just needs to help you work towards your goals. So yes, consistency is obviously super important for most things in life, but I think it's worth remembering that actually small periods of intensity punctuated by long periods of rest is also a very reasonable way to go about things depending on what you're working on. All right, tip number three, this is an absolute classic. The myth is that motivation leads to action. The myth is that, if I want to do something, I need to feel motivated to do it. But actually, the truth is, as a lot of you guys know if you've been consuming the productivity genre for as long as I have, motivation is a myth. Like, you don't need motivation to take action. You can simply choose to do something, even if you're not motivated to do it. And so rather than motivation leading to action, it's more that action leads to motivation. The more you do something and the more small successes you can get under your belt, the more motivated you're going to be to continue doing the thing. Alrighty, myth number four is that hustle culture is bad. Again, don't cancel me for this, but like, we have thrown the baby out with the bathwater by like, hustle culture is the worst thing ever. Yes, I agree. A culture that encourages people to like overwork themselves to the point of burnout is bad, but there's no getting around the fact that if you actually want to, for example, start a business or make passive income or start side hustles or like succeed in a competitive field, you do have to work for it. Like, there's no getting around that fact. Like, sometimes just working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, showing up, clocking in, clocking out, is not actually the way that you win, depending on what winning means to you. I get emails from people being like, hey, I love the idea of having a YouTube channel that makes me $10,000 a month. Do you think I can do that with 4 hours a week? And I'm like, no. Absolutely not. If you have the audacity to try and make $120,000 a year from a YouTube channel where you have fun, freedom, flexibility, you can do what you want, you can make what videos you want, how could you possibly think that that doesn't take any work? And I think this is kind of the issue with the whole hustle culture is bad kind of model these days. If you ask any successful entrepreneur, if you ask anyone who has done something that you maybe aspire to, then they will often say that they hustled really, really hard. And then once the thing became successful, then they cared more about work-life balance and that kind of thing. So ultimately it all comes down to, what is your goal? Like, what's the point of doing the thing? If your goal is to do something extraordinary, whatever that looks like for you, you probably have to put in extraordinary amounts of work. If your goal is not, if your goal is like, actually, I just want to have a balanced and chill life, great, fantastic. You don't need to hustle at all, but it really just depends on what the goal is. And I almost don't like the fact that like we've gone so far the other way of like hustle culture is the worst thing ever, that encourages people that like hard work is actually a bad thing. Alrighty, so continuing these somewhat hot takes in this video, myth number 5 is that productivity is not self-care. There's a great book by Grace Beverley called Working Hard, Hardly Working that talks about this. It's basically about like how we've somehow ended up with these two different camps. We've got team productivity that's like, yeah, I wanna work. And we've got team self-care that's like, no, don't do any work. Go have a bath, go like get some rose petals, go for a walk in nature. And these are not like diametrically opposed things. They're actually kind of two sides of the same coin. They often kind of go together. And sometimes productivity is self-care. It's not necessarily self-care if you've got your taxes due the following day to be like, you know what, screw hustle culture, screw productivity. I'm just gonna, pour myself a warm bath and I'm gonna take a walk in nature and I'm gonna have a nice time. It's like, no, you're gonna get fined, potentially end up in prison. Like, bad things will happen if you don't do your taxes. Similarly, oh, I'm not gonna hand in my dissertation tomorrow because I deserve self-care. No, screw that. Sometimes the greatest thing you can do for your own self-care is to actually be productive, is to get that thing in on time, is to actually spend a few extra hours working in the evening, because that is the best thing you can do for your mental health, rather than thinking that like, cool, I must finish work by 5 p.m. and if I don't, like, screw all the consequences of that, I'm just gonna focus on self-care. So again, please don't cancel me for this, but what I'm trying to say is that like, we've possibly gone too far in the direction of separating out productivity and self-care. And actually, in some cases, productivity is self-care, and in some cases, self-care is productivity. In some cases, actually taking a break, taking a vacation is exactly what you need to boost your productivity. And so, these are not like two very different things. All right, myth number 6 is that goals should be SMART. Now this one is interesting. If you look at any video, any blog post, any book about goal setting, you'll come across the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, or something like that. The issue with SMART goals, there's nothing particularly wrong with them on the surface, but they don't tell the whole story. We want to add a few things to that. Firstly, we want to add proximal, i.e., there's a bunch of evidence that says that goals that are more like close to us in time are better than goals that are really far out from us in time. And often if you think about a goal of like, I really want to build $1 million business, and you have never built a business before, like that goal generally is not particularly helpful or particularly motivating. But instead setting the goal more proximally of, I want to make $100 a month with my business, that's actually way, way, way more like kind of proximal than the goal of I want to make $1 million with my business, even though both might be equally achievable depending on kind of what your time horizon is. But the other thing to keep in mind with goals is the difference between intrinsic goals and extrinsic goals. And I've been doing so much research about this, like reading a shit ton of papers and stuff for research for my book. But essentially an extrinsic goal is a goal that has a specific kind of like external goalpost applied to it. So for example, hitting 1 million subscribers would be an extrinsic goal. Trying to win a particular competition would be an extrinsic goal, because it's like broadly these things are outside of your control. Whereas an intrinsic goal might be something like I want to make connections with people, or I want to grow my own skills. It's more of like an internal drive rather than an external thing that's sort of outside of your control. And now your goals are not subject to the whims of the market or the whims of other people. They're purely within your own control. And so you're more likely to feel a sense of autonomy and power and competence as you work towards those particular goals. All right, myth number 7 is that you can do everything. That if you are just a little bit more productive, if you had a little bit more time, if you were just a little bit more disciplined, you would actually be able to do everything on your to-do list. And this is a bit of a myth. All of us today, all of our to-do lists are never ending. There is an endless amount of work we could be doing. There's an endless amount of household improvements we could be doing, an endless amount of quality time we could be spending with our family and friends, an infinite amount of tasks we could be doing for our work or our business, an endless amount of hobbies we could be working on. We want to do all these things. The list is never ending. And this is something that Oliver Burkeman talks about in the book 4,000 Weeks, which is actually really good. And it's basically about embracing our finitude and embracing the fact that we're gonna die and we're not gonna have time to do all the things. And so we can just strategically decide what are the things we're gonna be mediocre at. I have strategically decided I'm never going to be good at replying to messages on WhatsApp or emails and stuff. I'm like, in a dream world, if I had magically 5 extra hours in the day, I would love to reply to everyone who messages me. Physically, I can't do that. I'm going to not beat myself up for doing that. I cannot do everything. And I think when you embrace that attitude of finitude, the attitude of I actually can't do everything, it means you're like, cool, I can probably only do like 3 things today. What are those 3 things I want to do? And then you can just sort of safely ignore the rest and hope that it doesn't come back to bite you in a bad way. All right, moving on. Myth number 8 is that you don't have time. I hate it when I hear people say, I don't have time to do X. I used to tell myself this back in the day, back when I was in school. But as I started reading productivity books and getting more into this thing and tried to genuinely be more productive, I realized that whenever I tell myself I don't have time, A, I'm lying to myself, and B, I am taking autonomy, control, and power away from myself. Because it's never that you don't have time. It's always that the thing is not enough of a priority. And this is just a subtly different way of phrasing the same thing. Like right now, I don't have time to take singing lessons regularly. But like realistically I do. Like, if I really wanted to, if you offered me £1 million every time I took a singing lesson, I would make the time to take singing lessons. The problem is, it's like a thing I want to do. My calendar is a bit chock-a-block with other things. I'm working on my book. I'm trying to do some videos and podcasts and all this other kind of stuff, trying to have a balanced life. Singing lessons are not really a priority right now. So it's not that I don't have time for them, it's that I'm choosing not to make them a priority. And almost whatever circumstance you find yourself in, you can always choose to reframe things that way, because saying it's not a priority for me right now is just a more high autonomy way of saying the same thing of I don't have time. But as all the research shows, when you feel autonomy, you feel more self-determined, you feel like your life is more under your control. And even if it's not, even if you genuinely don't have time, by just telling yourself that, no, I'm choosing not to make the time, you get more of that feeling of control, and therefore you're far more likely to A, be productive at the thing, but also you're gonna feel better because, we as humans have evolved to have this innate need for autonomy. And so if you can satisfy that need by just changing the story you tell yourself about whether you have time or whether you're just choosing not to make it a priority, that is a thing that then bleeds into every other aspect of life and just makes life feel a lot better. All right, myth number 9 is that productivity is about doing more. And yes, it's about doing more to an extent, but actually productivity is more about doing more of the right things. And the way I think of it is the productivity equation, which is that productivity equals meaningful output divided by time multiplied by fun. The output needs to be meaningful. There is no point driving super fast down the road if you are driving in the wrong direction. That's like actively counterproductive. And so really productivity involves like a balance of all of these different terms. It's not just about doing more things faster, it's about doing more meaningful things. And the reason I've got fun in there as a concept is because I kind of think that if you can approach productivity in a way like where you can try and enjoy the things that you're doing and you can try and enjoy the journey, that is just a massive multiplier on your productivity. Because the real problem with trying to get things done is when you freaking hate doing the thing. And actually, if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, you might like to check out my online class all about productivity, which is available completely for free on Skillshare, who are very kindly sponsoring this video. If you haven't heard by now, Skillshare is the world's leading online platform for educational classes. They've got classes on all sorts of things from productivity, video editing, YouTubing, cooking, interior design, business, so many things. But the reason why you should sign up for Skillshare, if you haven't already, is because I've got around 12 different classes on Skillshare that are available completely free of charge when you sign up to Skillshare or when you take out a free trial. So you can check out any of my 3 classes around productivity. If you're interested in starting a YouTube channel, you can check out my YouTube for Beginners class. I've had comments from people being like, I can't believe this is free. I would have paid $500 for this, and it's all completely available for free on Skillshare. So if you are one of the first 1,000 people to hit the link in the video description, then you can sign up for a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. And in that time, you can watch any of my classes to your heart's content, and you can explore all of the other things that Skillshare has on offer. So thank you so much, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. All right, myth number 10 is that you need large amounts of time to do good work. This is a myth that I find myself buying into quite a lot. I'm like, I only have 23 minutes until my next meeting or my next appointment or my personal trainer session at the gym. I can't really get anything done in 23 minutes. You know what? I'll just like screw around and scroll Twitter and keep up to date with what's going on with like FTX and all of this fun stuff. But actually that's a bit of a myth, because if I wanted to, I actually could be more intentional with how I'm using those 23 minutes. And there's a fantastic book by Matthew Dix called Someday is Today that is like super inspiring and amazing if you want to boost your productivity, but also if you just want to improve your life in general. And one of the things he says, like Matthew has written about like 10 plus books in his life, while also being a full-time teacher and also doing a bunch of internet stuff and also having kids. And he says that the way he manages to write all these 10 books is that he does his writing in between random moments in the day. Like if someone is 7 minutes late to a meeting, he'll just get his laptop out or get his notebook out and just write 7 sentences. Because you can write 7 sentences in 7 minutes. And yeah, it's not a whole chapter, but it's 7 sentences. And those 7 sentences get you closer to the goal of actually writing the chapter. And I just love that. I find it so inspiring. And I think it's so true that it's so easy for us to convince ourselves and believe the myth that we need these large, uninterrupted blocks of time to do deep work. Yes, it's really nice to have, but if you have a busy life, if you have other things going on, if you have kids, I haven't got kids. I have no idea what it's like having kids, but it's like people I know who have kids, I'm just like, how do you do it? But you know, what Matthew says in the book, which I broadly agree with, is that you find the time, you make the time in these like little pockets of time. And if you kind of waited for the opportunity where you magically had, I don't know, 3 free hours and a coffee in a nice environment to do your work, you'd never, ever get anything done. And so really, I think this is a myth, and we should kind of take advantage of being a little bit more intentional in those little moments in the day where otherwise we'd find ourselves doing totally pointless things like scrolling Twitter. Obviously, nothing wrong with scrolling Twitter, but as long as you're doing it intentionally. I find myself scrolling Twitter a lot, and I always think to myself, do I really want to be doing this? And sometimes the answer is yes, where I'm like, I really want to scroll Twitter right now, which is totally fine. But at other times, the answer is, I actually don't. The only reason I opened up Twitter is because I just kind of muscle memory, and then I choose to close it down and do something a little bit more intentional with my time. On a related note, myth number 11 is that your environment has to be perfect. I love a good desk setup like anyone else. I have all these accessories on my desk. I have a little candle. It's nice having a candle. I have a little fake plant. It's nice having a fake plant. But crucially, it's a bit of a myth if I'm telling myself I require these things to be more productive. Yes, they kind of help, but they're not requirements. They're what the Stoics would call preferred indifference. I'm broadly indifferent to the presence of a candle or a nice headphones or a nice lamp on my desk, but it would be nice if I had it. But that doesn't necessarily mean I can't get work done without having these things. And I've met a lot of people over the years who have sort of added up these fake requirements to them in their minds. It's like, oh, I can't get any work done until I do my morning routine. It's like, BS, of course you can. I can't get any work done unless I have like 2 monitors in front of me. Like, no, you absolutely can. You're just kind of being a bit precious about it. And like, there's really no need for that. Like, people have been doing lots and lots of very useful and very productive things since like the dawn of time without having access to all this fancy tech and aesthetics and like coffee shop and latte art that we convince ourselves that we actually need. We don't need any of that. We can be productive in the most ascetic environments. Really, I think kind of the fewer requirements you can have in your own mind for what you need to be productive, the more likely you are to be able to actually achieve the things that you want to set out to. All right, myth number 12 is that the small stuff does not matter. You will hear some productivity books saying that it's not about how fast you type. It's not about the keyboard shortcuts. It's not about like these little micro adjustments. It's about the big picture stuff. And I agree to an extent. Yes, it's about the big picture stuff, but actually the small micro adjustments that you can do to your productivity do actually help. Like, I have found it incredibly valuable training my typing speed to the point that I can type like 150 words per minute. That makes it that means that everything I do on the computer is twice as fast as someone who types at 75 words per minute. And so for me to reply to emails very quickly is twice as fast. For me to write a script for a video is twice as fast as someone else. And in a way, it's like, the way I think of it is that if I can, like when interacting with a computer, for example, if I can reduce the amount of time between me having a thought and that thought like happening on the computer, it just reduces the friction for absolutely everything. Whereas my mum, for example, will take about 10 times as long to do exactly the same thing, if not longer. And so for her, like there is actually genuinely a cap to how much work she can get done in a particular day. I found this like really held true when I used to work as a doctor. As junior doctors, you have to do a lot of typing. You have to do a lot of admin. Once you see a patient, you type up the notes, all this kind of stuff. The other 3 doctors that I was working with, who were also kind of the same level as me, their typing speeds were like kind of slow. And so they would stay behind for like an hour after work to fully type up the notes that they were doing for the patients. Whereas for me, my typing speed was fast. And so I could see a patient and like, while the patient was like in the waiting room and waiting for the blood results to arrive, I would just like type up the notes. It would be super detailed because I can like type pretty fast. And then I wouldn't need to stay behind after work while these guys were like scrolling notes on bits of paper and then having to sort of type them up afterwards. Training your typing speed is actually not that tricky. I also have a class in Skillshare about how to type faster if you're interested. But training your typing speed isn't that hard. And it's a thing that really then bleeds into every area of your life. And it's like genuinely a useful thing. Yeah, fine, it's not gonna move the needle for your productivity, but if you can go home an extra half an hour early because you've managed to type things faster than other people around you, it's just generally nice for your life as well. And finally, myth number 13 is that reading too many books is useless. Now, again, this is sort of like the consistency intensity stuff. If you are the sort of person that reads absolutely no books at all, then your life will be immeasurably improved by actually reading. Like, there's just like mountains and mountains of evidence that people who read, is like, if you basically ask anyone who's successful, they will credit their success to reading books. So if you don't read anything at all, then you need to read some amount of books. But there's almost this counterculture that says there is such a thing as reading too many books. You know, sometimes I'll mention that, oh yeah, I read about 100 books a year. And people are like, what? 100 books a year? There's no way you could possibly get any value from those books because you're listening to them at 3x speed, or because you're just skimming them, or because like, it's so much better to read 1 book a year and just really absorb and apply the insights. It's always a little bit more nuanced than that. The way I think of it is that when it comes to reading, there are really 2 modes of reading. There's reading for exploration, and then there's reading for exploitation or action or insight or whatever you want to call it. So when I'm reading for exploration, you know, recently I've become interested in like world history. And so I'm listening to Sapiens. I've read a book called The Bomb by Fred Kaplan, which is all about the history of the nuclear bomb. And it's like interesting things like that, where realistically, I'm not going to be trawling through the book about the invention of the nuclear bomb and being like, what insights can I apply to my life here? That's just not how it's going to work. It's more like, I'm interested in the topic. I found a book that a friend recommended to get a cursory overview of the topic. And so if I listen to it at 3 times speed and get done with it in 4 hours, now I just have all this knowledge and background context in my brain about the nuclear bomb. And maybe I can't recite like by memory exactly the names and dates and stuff of the people that were involved in inventing it, but at least I know enough of the big picture. And so that is reading for exploration. I'm exploring a new topic. Whereas, yes, I agree. If I'm reading for exploitation, if I'm reading a business book, for example, and I'm trying to actively apply the insights to grow my business, it makes a lot more sense for me to just read a few of them and apply those insights rather than read 500 of them and not apply any of them at all. So I think it's not quite as simple as reading loads of books is bad for you, like some people say. It's more like, well, it depends. What are you reading them for? Are you reading for exploration, or are you reading for exploitation or insight? So that brings us to the end of this video. If you liked this, you might like to check out this video over here, which is 12 cheap purchases under $20 that have genuinely improved my own productivity. If you're interested in being more productive, like you might find some things in there that you haven't thought about, that you can buy very, very cheaply. You can add to your desk and it will just level up your productivity. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.